Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at women who are radicalized. 3 women here in France at the heart of a failed plot to blow up a car near Paris's Notre-Dame Cathedral. We're talking about it with France24.com's Lila Jacinto. Nita Malik, researcher at the Quilliam Foundation, who also works with AWARE, the Alliance of Women Against Radicalization and Extremism. She is in London. Dalia Ghanem-Yazbek, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center, is with us from Beirut. And joining us now for part 2 from London, Catherine Brown, lecturer in Islamic Studies at the University of Birmingham. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
59 French women under formal investigation out of 270 suspected radicals in this country. Those were the figures as of last Friday. 18 behind bars, says the Paris prosecutor. François Molins, with a nod to what something Lila Jacinto said just before the break, how women often weren't looked at as closely by investigators.
The fact that young women acted upon their plans, all the while communicating with Islamic State members located in Syria, indicates that this organization intends to use women as combatants. While in the past it would appear that women in the Islamic State organization were limited to family and household duties, we must today acknowledge that this is clearly no longer valid.
Catherine Brown, are we at a turning point?
I think we have to be quite cautious before saying that women are going to be involved in the front line. I think it's clear that Islamic State are struggling to maintain operational focus within outside of their territories, and therefore they're seeking alternative ways of inviting terror within the West, which means that we'll see women being used for operations, but usually in the preparation stage. And these women that have been arrested in relation to the canisters that we believe to be targeting Notre Dame, they're in the preparation of them. But I'm not sure we can call it a turning point. The majority of their propaganda, the majority of their outlook and messages still very much maintain this idea of women taking a backseat role and only performing acts of violence when there are no other options. When there are no other options. Dalia Ghanem, this was quite an amateurish attempt to blow up these gas canisters. These were not professionals. Is all this a sign that ISIS is strong or that ISIS is weak?
I think, the message is strong. Why? Because, using a woman is very symbolically strong in the sense that this is sending a very strong message to the man, saying that you are not capable to do so, so we are sending women instead of you to do the job. So this is talking to the men's manhood and men's virility. But I think it is also a sign of the Islamic State being, if I may say, on the edge. It is becoming very hard for the Islamic State organization to hire. Yet it should be said that the propaganda is still very strong, and the message is still, galvanizing hundreds and thousands of people. So, the fact is that let's keep in mind that when a terrorist act is perpetrated by a woman, it attracts 8 times more media than a man. And, this is like a free PR campaign for the Islamic State organization.
A free PR campaign, which I guess in a way, Lila Jacinto, we're participating in by discussing this. It is one of the dilemmas that we talk about in newsroom editorial meetings. Other interesting point about whether or not ISIS is strong or weak is, if we recall this woman we were talking about before the break, who was promised in marriage to 2 attackers and now is involved in a 3rd plot. Is that a sign that the number of people willing to carry out attacks, there just aren't that many of them, and they kind of all know each other?
François, I couldn't agree with Catherine more. I think it's been more than a decade that I have had to repeatedly explain to editors who have constantly put me on the story of female jihadists that, wait a minute, we're really not at the top levels. If you examine the communications of Al-Qaeda, we're nowhere near. And you're right. This was an amateur attack. So I do think we should exercise caution. I have chased after, the white female jihadists of Al-Shabaab, and, they're really not top of the jihadist pecking order. In the context of marriages, what happens with these women is that they're engaged to marry, sometimes not forced to marry. I mean, they voluntarily radicalize, but just the turnover of life is so high. Malika El Aroud, who is this Moroccan, Belgian citizen of Moroccan origin, she was married to the man who was killed in Afghanistan. Her second husband gets killed in a drone strike in Pakistan. Likewise, the young French woman, Sarah H., as we called her, her first fiancé was killed while conducting an attack against a police couple. Her second fiancé was killed during the Normandy church attacks. So, once they get radicalized, there is a...
And again, we're talking about somebody who converted less than 2 years ago.
March 2015 was when her mother said that she had radicalized. And, this young woman was sent back from Turkey to France, and French authorities handed her over to her mother's care, hoping that her mother would look after her. But really, what we are seeing, and if you read that interview with the mother, it is tragic, because the number of parents who are putting out the help saying, putting out a call for help saying that we don't understand this, and it is extremely hard for parents to come to grips with it.
And you bring us to the other case that's been in the news this week, and I'll put it to you, Nikita Malik. We're getting the story of a boy, I didn't even know this was possible, who'd been under house arrest here in the Paris area since the age of 13. That was 2 years ago. And now he is in the process of being charged as a minor for heeding that call to take up arms and to he was saying that he was going to conduct knife attacks, even though he's under house arrest. He's just 15 years of age. What does that story tell you?
Well, part of the work I do is not just to examine women, but to also examine children, because the two of them are inseparable, particularly when we have the case of a young child here at the age of 13. So the reason he was under house arrest is because he was already on the radar for radicalization. And what this is showing us is that house arrest alone for 2 years is not enough to make a child de-radicalize. Unfortunately, in Europe, including the United Kingdom, we don't have a very good system in place for children who would be susceptible towards radicalization, both in preventative measures and in terms of de-radicalization. We have put a system in place, but it requires improvement. And so part of the work that we have to do is also prevent children in Europe from finding radicalization appealing. But in the long term, we must remember that there are a large number of children from European countries already in Islamic State who have either traveled with their families or alone. In the case if they're teenagers, they're able to travel alone. So we have a very long-term problem here, which we need to begin anticipating as to what European countries should be doing in order to reintegrate, rehabilitate, and de-radicalize these children.
Yeah, because what are they going to do with people coming back from Syria and Iraq, women coming back from Syria and Iraq with small children? How do you handle it?
So in the case of the UK, we have had one case, Tharina Shako, who returned with her toddler son, and she was prosecuted for 11 years. And of course, her son was taken away and put in a program and put in foster care. There are multiple instances of returning women that have happened in European states as well, such as Denmark. Those for confidentiality reasons have not been released. So what I'm trying to say is it really differs on a case-to-case basis and by country, because each country has a different governmental policy. But children, we must remember, are also victims. It might be a different case here with a 13-year-old boy because he's much older. But if we're talking about a child who's 4 or 5 years old, what decision-making process have they had in order to join join a jihadist movement or make hijrah and migrate to the caliphate? They've had absolutely no say in this decision at all. So we have to treat them as victims. And we need to have a reintegration process and a re-education process for them, because they would have gone through extreme trauma and stress in this journey.
All right, a small town, by the way, in the center of France is to host in the coming days what some are describing as France's first re-education camp. 300 youths to be housed in an abandoned school where they're to go through what sounds a bit like a boot camp with physical training, civics lessons. Cynics call it a Mao-style re-education center. The locals are divided, with some from the nearby village this Tuesday picketing the place, saying that they don't want this center there. Is a center like that, Catherine Brown, going to be effective?
To be honest, I doubt it. In the short term, it will provide the individuals in the care of the home focus, an opportunity to distance themselves from previous connections who might have helped them in the radicalisation process, and possibly give them an opportunity to think about where their future might be. But without a wider support network in place, one-off events, one-off isolated incidents probably are not going to have much of an impact. What would have an impact is when we look at schools and enable schools widely to talk freely about issues of terrorism, the role of religion within that or not, how minorities are treated, and to allow children to openly discuss these issues, and also to raise issues of discrimination against minority groups as well, so that they have an opportunity to vocalise and to talk about their experiences, and also then to move on and find alternative ways of thinking, and also to develop what I think is really, really important, critical thinking skills. What we see when we look at the radicalisation process are individuals who have taken on board the radical message but haven't really had the skills to critique or question. And I really think that putting that at the forefront of any de-radicalisation programme will give those young people resilience, and that has got to be much more sustainable in the long term, rather than just relying on one thing.
It's interesting that you mentioned schools there. I'm going to put it to Nikita Malik. Here in France, with the start of this school year, the Education Ministry saying it wants civics lessons, and it wants the issue of de-radicalization to be discussed in the school. And some teachers saying, hey, we're lost at sea over this. Are teachers equipped for this?
Not. And there's a responsibility for the government to train what we call train the trainers. Teachers need to be equipped with the skills to, as Catherine said, build resilience amongst young people. And teachers are not the only ones with the responsibility to do this. We need to increase resources to healthcare practitioners, to neighborhoods, to communities, and to families, particularly mothers. Because when we look at children, children will trust people in authority who they know. So they will look at their friends, they will look at their parents, nurses, and teachers. The last people they're going to trust are the police, because they're scared of them. And so we need to equip people that children are comfortable with to have the responsibility to educate them about radicalization. Because ironically, that is what radicalizers and extremists do. They are able to bring children on board by involving other children and by radicalizing families. And so we need to really counter that.
And on that point, Nikita, there was this perception that a lot of this is a question of testosterone, that it appeals to boys, this idea that they're going to play savior. When it comes to secondary schools, is the call to jihad heard as much by girls as by boys?
Yes. The reasons that boys and girls respond to this call for jihad are actually quite similar, even though the violence outcome is different. As I stated previously, girls go very much with the idea that they are going to get married. But it brings me back to this network concept, that it is networks that are radicalizing these young people, these young vulnerable people. And so it has to be networks that de-radicalize them as well. And the reasons for the call to go and join jihad are very much on what has been touched on before. Children want to know their purpose in life. They want to have a religious education, and they're not really quite sure of their identity. So I think identity classes are also very important, but let's not have a top-down approach. Let's not have teachers telling children that you are French or you are Muslim. Let's have children communicating with each other about who they are so that they're able to build resilience against not just different types of abuse amongst extremist groups, but also maybe sexual grooming online. So we're equipping them with a full spectrum of resilience involving people that they trust to do that.
All right, and it's just the beginning of the conversation in this country. Reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. Given the latest Paris plot involving 3 women, pretty clear the threat from Islamist terrorism isn't only from disenchanted men. Public opinion is scared. We saw those images of that demonstration on Tuesday. You recall, Leila, last month there was this big political brouhaha over banning the burkini on beaches in France. This idea of how all of this is going to work on impacting people who want to practice their faith.
I mean, in the French context, we just cannot lose sight of the fact that there is a presidential election next year. And the tone that the politicians have been putting out is extremely important. I don't know if some of our listeners will recall there was a piece in the New York Times that had, they solicited responses from French Muslim women. What do they think about France? And, they selected a few responses which provoked the ire of French Prime Minister Manuel Valls, who said that, this does not represent French Muslim women. Now, I mean, it's hard to have a few women represent French Muslim women, but this was clearly the view of some Muslim women. And, when you see these cases of the French civics lessons, I mean, good luck to it. I hope it works, but it's simply not going to work if, as our guests say, it's a top-down approach of this is what France is, this is what laïcité is, this is what the law of 1905 is all about. You have to understand where they're coming from, and most critical is critical thinking, to be able to question. So a top-down approach where little French children are supposed to just listen to what being French is about is really not going to help adults get into the world of a new generation, really.
Dalia Hanem Yazbek, what's the view from Beirut on all of this?
Well, I think, that there is in some European countries, unfortunately, especially in France, a major problem between two concepts that are integration and assimilation. And unfortunately, this is not helping anyone except the Islamic State. In my study, I showed that, I find that many women are attracted by this idyllic image of the Islamic State as a place in which they can be themselves and they can, fully practice their religion. So there is, from them a desire to be a respected Muslim woman in the West that has been, for a reason or another, hindered by the society and by, the state. And they join the Islamic State thinking that this is the place where they can finally be themselves. So there is a lot of self-seeking in that, and the Islamic State give them a positive image of themselves. So I think this whole story of burkini and the burqa in France is actually un faux problème, if I may say in French, because the real problem is a problem of how to integrate the Muslim community in France and in other European countries, how to have, equal social and professional opportunities for everybody. And this is actually making people going toward more identity problem, if I may say. Just one comment on the deradicalization debate. I think this word is problematic, and we scholars, we have a great responsibility in helping the media finding another word and stop talking about deradicalization. Radical in French means racine, which means in English root. Many of these people are searching for an identity, searching for a root, and the least what we can do is not helping them enroot themselves. By the contrary, we need to help them find a positive identity to feel like a full-fledged citizen.
So what term would you employ?
Sorry?
What term would you employ instead of de-radicalization?
Well, I think deradicalization is problematic. Unfortunately, I didn't find another suitable word for the moment.
Suitable
but
one.
I think
We're almost out of time.
We should.
I want to bring Catherine Brown in and see if she's come up with a better word or if she agrees with you. Catherine Brown.
I do think the concept of de-radicalization is problematic because it implies that we're more interested in changing people's ideas rather than their actions and behaviours. So in the past, we have sought to demobilize someone as a way of trying to show how they're no longer operative within terrorist organisations. But now we're more interested in whether or not their ideas no longer uphold those the same ideas as a terrorist organisation. It's not enough to renounce violence anymore. You have to also abide by the rules. So unfortunately, because of the way in which policy and government are actually trying to change the way in which we think about terrorism by not just focusing on the action, but also focusing on the ideas that lead up to it. I think de-radicalization and counter-radicalization or anti-radicalization are perhaps the best words that we've got. However, I would like to agree that the idea of uprooting someone probably isn't ideal, but the translation between the French and the English doesn't quite work as clearly as it does for the previous speaker.
Nikita Malik, we're almost out of time. Is de-radicalization what you practice?
Yes, I think it's an effective way of understanding the ideas. And in the end of the day, what we're looking at is ideas. And it's not just young people we need to engage. Young people are often very well integrated. It's their families, it's women, mothers. We need to engage these people. And what we need to do is inclusion. We need to include them rather than integrate them. Because integrate implies that we're forcing them to belong. Inclusion implies that we're catering our foundation towards them and allowing them to be part of their identity-making process. So I think de-radicalization is fine. I just think it's the processes towards de-radicalization that we need to focus on.
Nikita Malik, I want to thank you for joining us from London. I want to thank Catherine Brown for also being with us from the UK capital, as well as Dalia Hanem Yazbek in Beirut, Lila Jacinto. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
I got a bit of an earful earlier from Lila Jacinto. she did say that, you know, when it's men who carry out attacks, it doesn't make the news. When it's women,
yes,
we're
well,
putting on a show.
and quite possibly that is one of the reasons why this is happening now. We don't know exactly what it is that's driving this change, but there is a real possibility that they're going for shock value, because we have seen that when children are involved in these ISIS propaganda videos, the coverage is huge because people are so horrified at the idea that children are getting involved in
one of
this.
our panelists saying that militarily they're not doing that well, but PR-wise they're stronger than ever.
Absolutely. And if we take a look at the kind of stories around in the media at the moment on this issue, they range in terms of what they're covering from where exactly this is being, who's driving this? Is it ISIS? Is it the women themselves? Christopher Dickey in the Daily Beast has written saying that the terror group had always made it very clear that women were only there for one purpose alone, that was to serve the male jihadis, whether that's as a wife or as a mother. But these recent arrests show a major shift, he says. Now, what he asks, is it out of desperation or by design? And we simply don't know at the moment. However, these women aren't that emancipated, if you think about it. As he points out, they were run by a French male jihadist who's in Syria and Iraq, flitting between the two. As he puts it, they were run by remote control. We also hear that one of them had been engaged to two murderers who had carried out attacks in France, who are now dead. She was then engaged to another man who's now been arrested on suspicion of being involved in the terror group. And so that sounds as though that is a woman being passed around within a group, i.e. ISIS. And that these aren't women who are free to act as they will, because they're being treated in a very different way to any male members of ISIS would be.
What's your hunch on this? Because we're going to find out more as the days go on about these three women at the heart of the plot.
My hunch about what? The justice?
No, about how much they are themselves willful actors, or whether they're subservient and being manipulated.
it's yes to both. You know, they're functioning in a very conservative milieu, but they themselves are driving their own agenda. So they're brainwashed, and they have free will within their brainwashed arena.
You following?
Just about. If we take a look at 20 Minutes, they've been looking at, in particular, the comments from the Paris prosecutor François and their headline there says, women and jihad, an underestimated phenomenon. And what François had to say, he's the man who gives all those press conferences whenever there is a terror attack in France, now sadly, very well-known face here. He's admitted that French investigators were possibly guilty of believing that women within the ISIS fold followed their husbands and were relegated to doing little other than household chores. He now says they're seeing a real rise in young girls, causing a lot of concern. He talks about troubling profiles, about tough personalities, and that he says that they are central to planning these attacks. So it is that idea of a relative kind of freedom, but within this very constrictive kind of organisation. And a former anti-terror judge has also gone on to echo his words. But should we have been that complacent about it? Well, perhaps not. I mean, we have seen female jihadis in the past.
All right, Emma James, many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.